It is just 1 point from 7 games for Wayne Rooney. Just 1 win in 14. Just 2 points away from home all season. Plymouth have conceded the most goals at this stage of a championship season. They're on course to concede over 100 goals in a season. So we've been saying a lot recently, just in that it only did seem like a matter of time before Rooney was to go. And here we are, New Year's Eve. He's mutually parted ways. Interesting that it's mutually. I think we'll discuss that very shortly. But also interesting that Mike Phelan has gone. Of course, he was only brought in as Rooney's assistant coach a matter of weeks ago. But he's departed the club after a very, very short spell. In a statement, Rooney has commented saying, "I would like to take this opportunity to thank the board of Plymouth Argyle Football Club, in particular Simon Hallett and Neil Dewsnip, who I shared great relationships with." He would go on to say, "Thanks for the Green Army for making games at Home Park so special." Didn't mention the away games. They are memories we will share forever. And he signed off the statement by saying, "Plymouth Argyle will always hold a special place in my heart, and I will continue to look out for and take interest in their results." Plymouth, earlier on in the statement, would say, "We would like to thank Wayne and his team for all their efforts and wish him well for the future. The club will be making no further comment at this stage, with updates on our new first team management staff in due course." Justin, first reaction to this, what do you think?
Well, it's not a surprise, is it? It had to happen. If Plymouth bear any chance of staying in the Championship, they had to make a decision on Wayne Rooney. The football has been terrible. It's been terrible. It's been one of the worst, set of performances I've seen from a team in a long time. And that's saying something, because Rotherham last season were really, really poor. But Plymouth this season have been catastrophically bad. First 5 or 6 games, it was okay, excluding the Sheffield Wednesday hammering on the opening day of the season. First 5 or 6 games, it's okay. We're ticking over. And then it just dropped like a stone. They've conceded 40 goals since October 1st. It's just an astronomical amount of goals to concede. And at no point have they ever looked like ever being convincing defensively. And that's without even mentioning the away form. I know it's been a problem for a long time, but there have been so many variables here working against Wayne Rooney that, the decision needed to be done. Needed to be done 2 months ago.
Yeah, a while ago, didn't it? It was strange that they held out for as long as they did. I think let's go back to the very start, Justin, because Rooney came in and it was a massive surprise from our perspective for Rooney to have come in, because, of course, he was coming off the back of that disastrous spell at Birmingham City, and I was very much of the opinion that that was it for his managerial career in England. I just didn't see what other club would take a chance on him, and I didn't think he'd drop down at any level below the Championship. But he came in at Plymouth, and that was a surprise. But look, Plymouth fans were willing to give him time, weren't they? They wanted Wayne Rooney to be a success, and we had a bit of pushback from Plymouth fans saying, look, we know he's not done very well before in his managerial career, but we want him to be a success. We're going to give him our full support and see how things go. And you're right. For the first few games, they weren't great at all. They weren't creating a hell of a lot. Then they did have a slight improvement, didn't they? They, of course, were the first team to beat Sunderland this season, weren't they? I think.
Yeah.
So a great bit of form there, and the results at Home Park were very solid. Goal win against Luton as well. So things were looking pretty good for a small part. Pretty good, kind of, actually. But then, as you say, over the past few months, it's really, really tanked, hasn't it? And it's been really poor. And despite getting Mike Phelan in to try and shore things up, it's just not gone well at all. So with that being said, Justin, was he always destined to fail, do you think, when it came to this job?
I think he was. I think going back to the summer, there was a sense of, okay, well, fair enough, Wayne Rooney. You are going to a job that, on paper looks a good job, and I think we were very much in high praise of Plymouth and the running of the club, but as we've discussed recently, decision making at the club in recent, since Steven Schumacher left last season, it's been pretty poor. But there's a sense of, okay, well, fair enough. He's taken a job. He's going to a role that he's not walking into, and it be a nice environment. I know Derby wasn't great, but we still had a decent collective of senior pros at the club, and he could build the squad in his image, and he had Liam Rosenior, etc. So fair enough. But if we look at Plymouth as a football club, they're very much run on a data model, aren't they? So I think from that point of view, their recruitment has to be spot on. It hasn't been spot on. So from a footballing perspective, outside of Wayne Rooney's control, it was always going to be difficult. And then you've got to take into account his inexperience and I think his naivety as well. He's a very naive manager, I think. And I think if he doesn't have a trusted sergeant next to him who is very switched on, very intelligent, like a Liam Rosenior, he's going to struggle. And I think that Mike Phelan appointment came far too late for him. I'm not criticising the staff that are already there, but I think there's a sharp difference between Liam Rosenior and probably the staff that were at the club at Plymouth under him. So, I think there's an element of, definitely destined to fail, because I don't think he's got the experience required to lead a young and experienced squad into the championship. And obviously with the football club, they needed someone with a bit more nous, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that, Justin. But I do also think you can make a fair argument that he's been dealt a tough hand, because Plymouth, of course, at the end of last season were on a stinking run, weren't they? That was in part down to managerial choices, but also the squad had clearly lost a lot of quality. And it came into this season where it was a pretty poor squad, but then in the summer, they didn't add enough to it. I think we even ranked it as the worst transfer window in the championship this summer, or at least one of the worst. I don't think that's up for debate, really. And then what has obviously come out of that is that it's probably the worst squad, if not one of the worst squads. Yeah, one of the weakest, without a doubt. And so with that being said, I think Rooney has been dealt a pretty tough hand. It became pretty apparent that Morgan Whittaker and Ibrahim Sissoko, their two wingers, were the only ones who looked capable of doing anything for Plymouth. And then Ibrahim Sissoko was ruled out for 2 to 3 months. Morgan Whittaker was ruled out for a period of time as well. And that left Rooney with very, very little. And unsurprisingly, the results kind of simultaneously jumped off a cliff from that stage as well. So that's why I think you can make some excuses for Rooney in a sense, because I think even a manager of a much better standard than Wayne Rooney was always going to struggle with this team. But his naivety when it comes to tactics, and just the common theme that it seems to be he only does as well as his assistant manager is talented, is not a good sign. And as you mentioned, Justin, the defensive side of things is an absolute shambles. So you can balance it out a bit and say, look, it's the squad, but also Rooney. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be one who's going to take the blame for that, going to take the fall for that. And it looks like Rooney is the person who's taken that fall on this case.
Yeah, I mean, one measurable you've got to really focus in on, I think, is the drop-off of form of key individuals that have previously been very, very effective at this level. Ryan Hardy has looked non-existent in games. Morgan Whittaker hasn't had those star quality moments. I know he's been injured for a lot, and Ibrahim Sissoko has been one of the key performers, but again, picking up an injury at the wrong time. Bale Mumba's looked nowhere near as quality as as he has been, and the defence is just making mistake after mistake after mistake, trying to play out from the back. It's the same over and over again. And that's where I think someone with a little bit more experience will try and strip things back and simplify it for the players. And will also hone in on the individual quality of the players that he's got at his disposal, like a Morgan Whittaker. And I just don't think Wayne Rooney's found that balancing act at all, which is why the games have been so volatile. The win against Sunderland was a breathtaking win, wasn't it? There've been so many games this season where they've been, 1 or 2 goals down going into the second half, and they spark up a gear. There's so many inconsistencies within the squad. And unfortunately, that has just led to this dropping of confidence, dropping of quality, dropping of form, and he's not been able to recover it. And I think that comes down to, unfortunately, his managerial ability. So we can say, yes, he was dealt a tough hand, but I think someone with a little bit more experience, a little bit more tuned in to the modern game, if you like, they do better.
I think it is really worth mentioning that, as I was alluding to earlier, when Rooney initially came in, Plymouth fans were well behind him. weren't they? They were willing to give him their full support, and that led to a great atmosphere, particularly at home parks. Or Plymouth fans always travel well, but saw that continue to be the case, and they were giving Rooney their full backing, even when things started to look like they weren't going wrong. But after a while, when things were just going wrong week after week after week after week, that's when Plymouth fans started to turn and started to accept that not only have the club not done a good enough job in getting a good enough squad, Rooney has also got to take some of the blame here. And it's now got to the point where I don't know any Plymouth fans who were in support of Rooney coming to the end of this spell. And that's just essentially where it's gone wrong, really. Plymouth fans, I don't think they had high expectations for this season, but it just got to a point where they were just like, this clearly isn't working. If we want any chance of even putting up a fight to stay up, then we need to make a change. Because, as we were saying in the last episode, Justin, if things were to carry on, Plymouth were going to get cut adrift.
That's the key word, putting up a fight. They haven't looked anywhere near that level of being competitive. And I think when you get a manager in who can instill that belief in the players, that's when things start to change. I think we've already seen that impact from Gary Rowett at Oxford, even just after a couple of games. We've seen it from Paul Heckingbottom at Preston. There were several examples. We might see it at Stoke with Ryan Shawcross as caretaker manager. Managers breathe confidence into players, and I don't think Wayne Rooney has done that. And it's quite shocking, really, because if you get praise from a manager like Wayne Rooney, who's got the playing background he's got, and he's played under the managers he played under, you'd be over the moon. But it's clearly not had an impact, and I find that the most bizarre thing. Maybe that star power that Wayne Rooney once had has really, really rubbed off. And unfortunately, him as a manager, it's really hard to see where he can turn to from here.
Well, let's talk about that very shortly. Justin, we'll have a quick break. After that, we'll talk about what next for Wayne Rooney and also what next for Plymouth. Welcome back to the Second Tier Podcast. This is a reaction pod to the news that Wayne Rooney has left Plymouth Argyle. The next question is, what is next for Plymouth Argyle and what is next for Wayne Rooney? We'll start off with Plymouth, Justin. As you alluded to not too long ago, they've had a pretty terrible 12 months when it comes to decision making, haven't they? Ever since Stephen Schumacher left, they were to get in Ian Foster not long after that, who was Steven Gerrard's assistant down in Saudi Arabia. That didn't go well at all. Then they had Neil Dewsnip, who's sporting director, I think, who came in as caretaker and managed to see them over the line and keep them up in the end. Then they brought in Rooney. As we say, didn't look like any other club was going to give Rooney a chance. So it was surprising when Plymouth did. And that's why we're now in a position where Plymouth are bottom of the table, really, really poor squads, but they have got January coming up. So where do they go next? May I suggest they turn to a former Flame? Or well, they've got two choices because they've got two former Flames who are out of work at the moment.
They do. And Stephen Schumacher being one of the former Flames would be a great appointment, because I think, looking at the drop off in Stoke since he left earlier on in the season, and how they've really sunk, he would be a great appointment. I think his stock's very high. And I think Plymouth would be below him, to be honest, and that might come as a bit of a slight towards Plymouth. But if you look at where Plymouth are and where Stephen Schumacher should be, I think it's chalk and cheese. I said it in the weekend show. I think Plymouth are probably batting around a completely different market of managers now because of how bad the decision making has been over the past 12 months. I think they're probably looking at a lower league manager, or an out of work manager looking to recover their career a little bit. It's a very difficult one. But all I would say is, I think Stephen Schumacher would be a good appointment. I think their other former Flame, Ryan Lowe, would also be a good appointment. But I think they need to go down a slightly different route. Firstly, picking a manager who isn't Scouse would be helpful. Ryan Lowe, Stephen Schumacher.
Not a slight against Scousers.
No, it's not. Yeah, let's make that clear. But Neil Dewsnip is, a former Everton youth coach, for example. He's got relationships with the likes of Ryan Lowe, Scouse, Stephen Schumacher, Scouse, Wayne Rooney, Scouse, and Ian Foster, Scouse. it's just, branch out a little bit. I think you can afford to do that. But, there are lower league managers who might be chomping at the bit to get a job like Plymouth. But I think if they're going to have a successful manager in place, they need to come away from that data-led model a little bit and just stretch their legs in a slightly different environment, because I think that model has really, really put a parachute on the club's progress.
And if they happen to be Scouse, then that's absolutely fine.
That's absolutely fine. Scouse is fine. I dug myself a hole. I did.
It is just weird how they keep appointing Scouse, isn't it? But that'll be interesting to see whether they go down that route again. But yeah, obviously Ryan Lowe didn't leave on great terms when he departed Plymouth for Preston a few years ago now. So whether that happens, it'll be surprising, but it'd be interesting. Stephen Schumacher, I think, would be less surprising because he left on good terms because he went to Stoke. But whether, I agree with you, Justin, whether he would think to himself that the Plymouth job is below him, I think he may very well do that, because he probably thinks he'd be better off he's got a good chance of getting another championship job, one that isn't with a club planted to the bottom of the table. Do you know what I mean? So that's why the Plymouth job is such an interesting one. Do they go for an experienced manager and maybe try to salvage what they can of this season? Or do they go for someone who's more of a long-term option with a view to getting them back into the championship the season after next, when, they probably look like they're going down this season anyway. So what they do next is going to be really, really fascinating. I think Stephen Schumacher looks the obvious option at the moment. He'll probably be the favourites for the bookies without me looking. Whether he were to take that job is another question, but he seems like he would be the most obvious choice, I would say. But yeah, how Plymouth deal with this is going to be really, really fascinating, because right now they are in a right old pickle. But what is probably a more fascinating question, Justin, is what happens next with Wayne Rooney. Now, as I was saying, after the Birmingham spell, I thought that was it for his career managing in England. Now, surely after this, that's it, isn't it? That has got to be it for his managerial career on these shores.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's hard to see a way in because of how poor the last two spells have been. Now, I'm going to throw this out there. I mean, since covering covering the championship on this podcast, Wayne Rooney has overseen the two worst spells I can remember, and probably some of the worst. I mean, Gianfranco Zola at Birmingham was a car crash, and that's probably the worst statistically. But this has been two jobs one after another. It's been terrible. Birmingham was a catastrophe. This Plymouth spell has been probably just short of a catastrophe. Wayne Rooney set the wheels. You got the wheels in motion for relegation for Birmingham, which is ridiculous when you come to think of it. And unfortunately, he's got the wheels in motion for Plymouth's relegation as well. Also oversaw relegation with Derby, it is worth pointing out, despite a 21-point deduction. Yes, I'm aware. So yeah, it's not good for a CV, is it? So therefore, it's very hard to see him get a job unless one springs up out of the blue, and he's got a very good agent, which we know he does. So yeah, it's really hard to see him doing managerial work. I'm probably likely to see him on the TV, which is fine because he's stopped saying as much as he used to. So actually digesting what he says on the TV would be a lot more palatable.
I think it's got to be said, fair play to Wayne Rooney, because you look at other managers like a certain Coventry manager, for example. They always came across to me like they weren't willing to drop down to a certain level, whereas Wayne Rooney, no disrespect to Plymouth, he's done that. He has done that, hasn't he? He has been willing to cut his teeth and stick out and have another crack.
He's taken a risk as well.
Exactly. He doesn't need to go into management, does he? He's a very, very rich man. He's made a lot of money from football over the years. He could have very easily just hung his boots up and just stayed at home with his feet up every single day, or go into punditry or something like that. He didn't need to go into football management, and he's done that. And despite how terrible the Birmingham job was, he's decided to give it another go. And I think that is an honourable thing to do in respect to him. So fair play to him for that. What happens next with Wayne Rooney's managerial career? I would be surprised if he were to drop down to League One or League Two. because I think at this stage he may just have to accept that his managerial career hasn't been a success, and it may be getting to a stage now where it's almost tarnishing his playing career a little bit. I think the most likely thing for him is he goes into punditry. Maybe he gets a job in Saudi. I think I recall just over 12 months ago or so, he was being linked with a move to Saudi, and that wouldn't surprise me. Maybe the MLS again. I don't know. What I can say is that this has surely got to the end of his managerial career in England. And look, he's given it a go, Justin. We can say that much for sure. He's given it a go. He didn't need to, as I was alluding to, but he's tried. And, you know, that's all you can really do, isn't it, when you're a coach?
Yeah, exactly. When you're a former player, when you're as successful as he was as well, you almost have a responsibility to have a go. He's not gone down the coaching route typically like other good players have gone into. You look at Ryan Mason, for example. I know it was forced into an early retirement, but he did youth coaching. Now he's on the he's a senior coach at Spurs. That's the first example that came to mind. Probably not the best one, but I think it's good to cut your teeth at a youth level to find out whether it's really for you. Wayne Rooney jumped straight into senior management, probably unfairly as well at Derby. He definitely wasn't ready, and he was very lucky he had Liam Rossini and Justin Walker, who was a youth coach at Derby at the time as well, to step in and step up. And as I say, when you develop that, but the nous at youth level, I think you learn a lot more about yourself as a coach doing that than you would in senior football to an extent. So, yeah, it's hard to see him getting a job, but like you said, fair play to him. It's been a bumpy ride, and it's not been an easy one for him by any means. Two of the worst spells at championship level in history, an administration at Derby, and a holiday over in America. It's been a crazy old roller coaster for Wayne Rooney as a manager.
You could say that again. It's certainly been eventful, hasn't it? And you know what? He's kind of run parallel with this podcast as well, hasn't he? Because he got his first job in management in the season after we started, Justin, I think I'm right.
Yeah, it's the COVID year, wasn't it?
Yeah. So we've had Wayne Rooney in our lives for pretty much the duration of this podcast. Mm-hmm. And it's been a roller coaster, Wayne, but I feel like this has got to be the end. So it's been an honour, Wayne. You've given us plenty to talk about on this podcast over the past few years, but it's been an enjoyable one. So thank you, Wayne Rooney, for the content over the years. It's that old phrase, isn't it? What's good for the second tier podcast, Justin, isn't necessarily good for your club. And Wayne Rooney kind of embodies that. Oh, well, ladies and gents, it's the end for Wayne Rooney, and this is the end for us in 2024, unless another manager gets sacked in the next few hours. Oh dear. But this has been the Second Tier Reacts, and this has been us reacting to Wayne Rooney's departure from Plymouth Argyle. We'll be back again. Oh, I've forgotten what day it is again, Justin. We'll be back again
next year.
Next year, we'll be back again in 2025. We'll actually be back again on Thursday to give you a reaction to all of the New Year's Day action from across the Championship. So we look forward to seeing you then for that. But this has been the Second Tier Podcast. Happy New Year, ladies and gents. I've been Ryan Dilks.
I've been Justin Peach.
And a big thank you for listening.